Welcome back. We're now launching into lesson 2, the evolution of publishing. It's really important to understand that the music publishing industry is not a static or staid environment. It has evolved significantly. So let's go back, look at the origins of music publishing, and then work our way forward to the present day. This will probably surprise you. Music publishing has been around for around 100 years now. In anyone's language, that's a reasonably long time. It has continued to evolve, though. It's not what it was 100 years ago. And the reason it's had to evolve is because it is a business based in songs. And if you think about the way that songs are reproduced, the way they're communicated to the public, the way that music is consumed over the last century, there's been an enormous amount of change over that time, and the publishers have had to evolve with the changing music landscape. So let's start at the early days of publishing. Until around the 1940s, publishers pretty much controlled the recorded music industry, which is kind of funny when you think that a lot of artists these days think that publishing is a bit of an afterthought. The reality is that publishing drove and controlled the recorded music industry until around the 1940s. And there's a really specific reason for this. Back in those days, recording artists, rarely wrote their own songs. Very rarely. You would have a clear division between the people who wrote the songs and the people who recorded the songs. And record companies would generally sign artists who were great interpreters of songs, who could sell a song, who could take somebody else's great song and make it connect at a recorded level with a wide audience. They never really expected those recording artists to compose their own songs. It was just the fashion or the perception that they were two different jobs. So the Copyright Act, all the copyright acts around the world, one of the rights of the copyright owner is when they create a new work, or in this case a new song, they have the right to determine how that song should first be published. That's one of the rights of the copyright owner. So if you've written a great song and everyone acknowledges that it's a great song, you have a lot of power. You're able to say, all right, well, I would like my song to be recorded by that artist over there or that one down the road there, and those artists would be clamoring to get a hold of the right to record great songs. So the songs were king. And in order to utilize those songs, recording artists had to court publishers. It was a little bit of a two-way street. Publishers obviously wanted the songs in their control to be recorded by the very best recording artists, but equally the recording artists were hungry to get their hands on these really good songs. So the publishers were effectively the gatekeepers between the songs and the recording artists and the record labels that wanted to record those songs. So some of you have probably seen some old movies or done some reading about, the early days of songwriting and musical composition. When I say early days, in the modern world. You've heard of places in New York like Tin Pan Alley and songwriters like George and Ira Gershwin or Rodgers and Hammerstein or Cole Porter. And these are, legends of the early music industry, but they were primarily or almost completely songwriters. So they would write songs, they'd turn up for work every day, they'd punch the clock in at 9 a.m., go into a little room and sit there and write songs, and at the end of the day, clock out at 5 p.m. and go home to their families or whatever they were choosing to do, and come back and do it all again the next day. It was a job, and they would receive a wage. The publisher would own those songs, and then the publisher would go around and plug those songs to recording artists and also companies that wanted to publish and print sheet music. So the publishers would derive revenue from those products, from artists recording those songs, selling those recordings, from artists performing those songs live. We've already talked about live performance income, and from sheet music. It wasn't so much about radio play because radio didn't really be a thing, that music radio anyway, until around the 1920s. So it wasn't about getting radio airplay and then selling a heap of copies. It was actually about making a recording that people then said, oh, I like that song and I want to buy the sheet music and play it in my own home. That was the way people entertained themselves back in those days. There was a lot of home entertainment, but not as you know it now. The idea of the family standing around the piano, reading the sheet music, playing the song and singing along was a good time. And to be honest, it's probably still a good time if you have somebody in your family that can do that. All right, so in that era of the 1940s, the publishers were king. Moving forward though, into the 1960s, and we started to get a new trend emerging, and that was that artists or bands started writing their own songs and wanting to perform their own songs, and audiences wanted to hear the songs written by the artist. They got to a point of thinking, all right, well, if I'm going to engage with music, I want to hear the thoughts and the opinions and the perspectives of the person who's singing to me. I don't want them to simply be delivering the words and the music of somebody else. So this idea of singer-songwriter or bands recording original songs that they wrote themselves became quite dominant. And that caused the publishers to have to question their own business model. Publishers said, well, if we are pitching songs to recording artists and the recording artists are saying, we don't need your songs, we've got our own, what's our job? Now, this was not 100% across the board. There was still some amazing songwriters writing songs for other people, and other people would record those songs. And I'm hopeful that all of you have heard of, legends of songwriting like Burt Bacharach or Lieber and Stoller, and those type of songwriters clearly still existed. However, the emphasis was now on songwriters who were recording artists and recording artists who wanted to record their own songs. So that meant that the publisher had to ask the question, well, what are we doing here? What purpose do we serve? If songwriters say, we don't really need you to pitch our songs because we're going to record them ourselves, what is the nature of publishing? So it changed. It became very much a financial business. The accountants took over the publishing houses effectively, and they became bankers for songwriters. They would approach a songwriter and say, hey, I understand A, that you're a good songwriter, and B, that you have a record contract and you're about to release albums of your own songs with you as the performer. Well, you're entitled to get paid a separate payment even when you're recording your own songs. And songwriters would say, really? Wow, that's good to know. Of course, you guys know that in great detail now. So in a way, the publishers became speculative investors. They would say to these songwriters, okay, you're going to earn some income, but it's sometime off in the future. You've got to go and make that recording, then your record company is going to market that recording, and hopefully people are going to buy that recording and you'll generate publishing income from that. But how would you like to receive that money now? How would you like to receive your future songwriting royalties in advance? Now, if you were a songwriter, you would be pretty excited by this prospect, particularly if you had any doubt at all that you were going to generate this income in the future. You might be thinking, well, I've got a record deal, I think my songs are good, I think my performance is good, I think I'm going to connect with an audience, but if I don't, not only will I not receive any recording royalties, but I won't generate any publishing income. So if somebody came along and said, no, we're prepared to speculate that you will generate royalties from your songs in the future, and we're prepared to give you a percentage of those royalties now in advance, upfront. That was a very appealing concept to a lot of songwriters who were also recording artists. Of course, the next question they would ask is, all right, well, do I have to give that money back if my songs don't generate royalties? And the answer is, no, you don't. It's not a refundable advance. It's not a loan. It is a recoupable advance. So if we give you your money in advance and your songs don't end up making the royalties that we speculated they would, that's our problem. That's our bad. We've made a bad choice. But you don't have to give the money back. So clearly, for artists, the idea of getting a publishing advance was fantastic. Why? Because they weren't likely to see any money from recording for a while, because they had to pay back the costs of making the record before they got record royalties. So it was vital income. And that really became the role of the publisher. Through the 70s, 80s and 90s, they would identify songwriters who they thought were going to sell a lot of records, or occasionally they would identify a songwriter and help them get a recording contract so they would generate recording royalties, and that would be their role. So they would calculate, what do we think the future revenue of these songs is going to be? And that's where the accountants came in. They would apply a formula and say, all right, that's the size of advance we're able to give those songwriters. Now, some songwriters, that idea didn't apply to them. Maybe they weren't waiting for future royalties to come in one day down the track. Instead, they said, all right, well, all we really need is somebody to administer our catalogue. We know that we're going to generate publishing income in the future. We don't want to give up a big percentage of that because the publisher's not going to generate that. We are. We're going to generate that from our recording activities. And with a successful record, we're going to be able to tour, and we're able to make money from other parts of the industry. So these songwriters would simply say to the publisher, all we want from you is to administer our catalogue. Administer our catalogue. And the publisher would say, all right, well, we're set up to do that. We have the capabilities of doing that. We don't need to own your songs and your the musical compositions. We don't need to own those things. We're happy to just administer your catalogue on your behalf and take a small percentage. And that percentage might have been 10 or even 5%. And I actually worked for a company, about 150 years ago when I was young, that administered the Rolling Stones catalogue in Australia. And I think from memory, our fee for administering their catalogue was all of 3%. But we didn't actually have to do very much. So there is this idea of an administration deal came in. Okay, so let's move on to modern publishing. The business of music publishing has now evolved and changed yet again. And there's a really obvious reason for that. In the early parts of the current century, record sales dropped significantly. Now, I'm not going to spend a long time talking about that in this particular unit. We all know there was problems with piracy and all sorts of different reasons why record sales dropped. But if record sales dropped, it also meant that mechanical income dropped. If you're not selling as many records, your songs are not generating as much publishing income. So the publishers were a little hesitant about giving big advances to songwriters. They were like, well, with the current state of record sales, we can't be certain that we're going to get that money back. So advances dropped. Now, if you're a songwriter and you heard that your proposed advance was going to be half of what a songwriter of your level would have got 5 or 10 years ago, you're going to question the role of the publisher. You're going to say, why would I hand over the rights in my songs to a publisher if they're only going to give me an advance that is relatively small. So they said, all right, well, in order to do that, we require the publishers to actually be more proactive. We don't want them just sitting there collecting mechanical royalties from record companies. We need them going out and sourcing more revenue earning opportunities for our songs. And so in this digital world, the role of the publisher has changed. The role of the publisher is now to generate income from multiple sources, and they have certain advantages in doing that. The big advantage is that there are more multiple sources to generate income from. Lots of new platforms, lots of new technologies, and so the publishers have to be at the forefront of generating that sort of income. So now a good publisher would be expected to source real opportunities, genuine opportunities in film, in TV, in video games, in advertising, and a good publisher would also be expected to be at the forefront of negotiating with new platforms that are using the work of songwriters, whether that's TikTok or Twitch or YouTube or Spotify or any of the new platforms that are emerging. The songwriter doesn't want to be out on their own trying to deal with those new potential revenue streams, and the role of a good publisher is to be very active and work together with other publishers to ensure that that income is being generated for their songwriters. So it's now a very proactive business. The old school publisher who would simply give you an advance and send you a royalty check, hopefully every 6 months or so, doesn't really cut it anymore. Publishers have to be super proactive, and hopefully that will help you understand what to look for in a modern day publisher. It is an evolving business model. All right, so hopefully that all makes some sense to you, and we'll see you in the next lesson. Thank you very much.